Welcome to this presentation. My name is Edwin Tallam, PhD candidate at the University of Witwatersrand, South Africa. Welcome. My presentation is titled Elements Influencing Trust in Online News Consumption in Kenya. Now, just to give us a brief background, trust in news media is critical for legitimizing and lending credence to the news and, by extension, democracies. Now, through a multiplicity of social media and messaging applications, users navigate a variety of news information, real or fake, and this has ignited epistemological and practical interventions across the globe. Yet, within these expanded news exposure avenues, truth, half-truths, rumors, and gossips compete for attention, thus raising concerns on the capacity of the news users to draw a distinction between the variety of news available. Now, with this in mind, this study locates and positions the news as a critical pillar in linking the collective societal goals and aspirations with individual information needs, that is, mapping how such information shapes, distorts, creates, and recreate realities in context. Now, my question is the question that I aim to answer, or what I am answering in this presentation is, what are the elements that influence news consumption among young people? And when I talk about young people, I refer to young people between the ages of 18 and 25. Now, just to give us a methodological context, this study was mixed in nature and it was conducted in two public universities in Kenya. Now, one is the Technical University, which is in Nairobi, which is in the Central Business District, and the University of Eldoret, which is in the northwestern part of the Rift Valley. Now, the first phase was a survey which involved 800 students, and this survey aimed at mapping the emerging and receding news consumption avenues among young people, paying attention to the platforms. Yet from the 800 students that participated in the first phase of the study, I was able to also sample focus group participants from both institutions. I had 4 focus group discussions aimed at, in each institution, aimed at explaining or probing the emerging trends from the survey. Now, the findings here, as you can see, this diagram gives us, in this question, I was asking young people, what is your main way of accessing news? Now, this was just from the survey, just to understand what is happening in regard to news consumption. Now, the blue color represents the main way, and I will dwell on the blue color for today because of the time. And you can see from this presentation that social media has actually overtaken radio and television as the preferred or the main way of news consumption. I will show shortly, because social media encompasses different platforms. We have Facebook, we have Twitter, we have there are a host of platforms, but overall, social media is at 47%. That means it is coming up as the main way of accessing news. Now, this is not to say that radio and television have lost or ceded ground. Radio and television come at 64 and 63% respectively from this data. But word of mouth as well is also important in news consumption. We should not forget that, because as you can see, about 10% said, oh, we get our news from, we listen to our friends, they share with us the news. Now, importantly also in this chart or diagram is newspapers have, very low readership as the main way of accessing news. And this is understandable because this cohort of respondents are not working and they don't have money to buy newspapers. Now, in terms of the perception of the level of trust across selected online news sources across both institutions, now, as you can see here, UOE stands for University of Eldoret, while TUA stands for Technical University. And I want to mention here that measuring trust is something that is next to impossible. So what we can only do is just to look at the perception. And even when we talk about the perception, still it's not clear because uh, perception is relative. So, but this again from the survey just gives us a rough idea of what is happening. So if you can see here, barely a decade ago, blogs or blogospheres were the main way of accessing news and they were most trusted. But in 2020 or 2019, it is the reverse, where now blogs are the least trusted, and we have new entrants. And in this new and the new entrants, particularly from the social media, we have WhatsApp, which is coming up very strongly as the most trusted across both institutions. Now, Twitter as well is doing, catching up with WhatsApp in terms of trust, followed by Facebook, and then of course Telegram and Instagram and Snapchat. Because and the trend here is it appears that messaging applications are gaining, are fairly trusted among young people. Now, the question, remember from the beginning, I mentioned that this study aims at, shedding more light on how young people come to trust or verify news that they receive online. And in this study, from the focus group discussion, it emerged that there are a number of ways that young people have devised to try and cushion themselves from the mis and disinformation and even malinformation. Now, these are the 5 points that I want to talk about, which emerged from the thematic analysis. That number one, news genres and content play a very important role in terms of shaping trust online. Now, young people mention that, if I'm a sports fan, for example, or if they love politics, then my love for a particular genre or my liking or my predisposition to a particular genre sometimes blinds or obscures what could otherwise be information that is not true, because you love or you have a liking or you have a positive attitude towards that particular genre, then it obscures whether it is true, half truth. Sometimes it escapes because of the overall predisposition towards that particular genre. Number two is motivation for news consumption. Now, today there are algorithms, and sometimes news is not deliberate. News consumption is something that occurs accidentally. But in this case, it appears that there are some specific intrinsic motivations that drives news consumption among young people. And this also shapes the level of trust tied to the news consumed from different platforms. For example, if, for example, young people, they mention, particularly male students in both institutions, talked about sports. So the motivation for consuming sports, for example, over time, they get experience, like they have a lot of background information about a particular news story, which also makes them be able to filter whether there is some element of truth or falsehood in a particular narrative. Now, thirdly, consistency and availability of news story in a host of platforms. In this point, they mentioned that, of course, a basic way of verifying or cross-checking whether news is trustworthy is whether the same story is available across a number of platforms at a time. So if the story is on Facebook, is on WhatsApp, is on Twitter, then that means chances of that story being true or credible or trustworthy is very high. But again, this is where the paradox is, because sometimes these stories are peddled and are spread across different platforms, and they may not be true, thus opening the Pandora's box in terms of this way of verification could in the long run lead to or mislead young people. Now, fourth is verifying the sources of information, where they talked about, of course, when you talk about social media, they follow their close friends. And from these friends, they have strong ties, so that if a close friend whom you have strong ties with shares a news story with you, whether through WhatsApp or Facebook or Twitter, then chances of you trusting that particular information is very high. Now, fifthly, and not last, finally, is anonymity and use of fake social media accounts, where young people mention that, of course, another way of flagging news stories online or trying to filter information that is true or false or rumors and gossip is by checking the name used by different users online, so that those who use pseudonyms and anonymous accounts are flagged for information that is not true, and many a times such information has to be verified. Yeah, in conclusion, traditional media brands are increasingly popular among young people online, particularly in verification of news amidst the rise of dis and misinformation. Now, it means that because of these tensions of trying to verify news stories across different platforms, young people have gone back to traditional media, particularly radio and television, because it seems, according to them, these conventional channels or traditional channels have mechanisms and ways of making sure that the stories that they share, the news stories that they disseminate, are cross-checked. Now, findings also support the conclusion that news consumption is primarily shaped by perceptions on the level of trust enacted by specific channels or platforms at and across different time and places. I think this came out very strongly, particularly among the young people who participated in the focus group discussion, that it's all a matter of, do you trust the platform that you use to access the news and also the people who share the information? So up to that point, because of time, thank you for listening, and I welcome further questions and engagements on what I've just presented. Thank you.